Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, your cozy corner for exploring the deep and enriching world of books. Today, you're here with us for something special, and that says a lot about you. You could be anywhere else, scrolling through endless feeds or binge-watching a series, but you've chosen to dive into The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. That choice shows you're invested in understanding more about life, relationships, and yourself. So what makes this book extraordinary? It's a profound guide that has transformed the lives of many, offering insights into personal growth through discipline, love, and spirituality. This isn't just a self-help book. It's a companion for life's journey, endorsed by luminaries like Oprah Winfrey, who praised its ability to change perspectives and lives. But who is M. Scott Peck? Before he became an influential author, he was a psychiatrist and a thinker, deeply curious about human nature. Peck's own struggles with mental health and spiritual crisis drove him to pen this masterpiece, blending scientific insight with spiritual wisdom. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. A profound guide to life's journey. M. Scott Peck was a psychiatrist whose own battles with mental health and spirituality inspired him to explore the complexities of the human condition, resulting in a book that blends psychological insight with spiritual wisdom. Picture this. You're sitting with a friend who's just told you they want to transform their life, lose weight, learn a new skill, or finally write that novel they've been talking about for years. What's the first thing that pops into your mind? If you're like most people, you probably think about motivation, inspiration, maybe finding their passion. But here's what M. Scott Peck discovered after decades of psychiatric practice. The real secret ingredient isn't passion at all. It's something far less glamorous but infinitely more powerful. It's discipline. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this sounds like another lecture from a stern parent or drill sergeant, stay with me here. Peck's understanding of discipline is nothing like the harsh, punitive version we often associate with the word. Think of discipline not as a whip, but as a gentle, persistent hand guiding you toward the person you want to become. It's the difference between forcing yourself to do something and choosing to do something because you understand its deeper value. Peck opens this exploration with a simple but profound observation that most of us have experienced firsthand. He talks about the difference between people who seem to effortlessly maintain good habits and those who struggle with even the simplest commitments. What separates these two groups isn't willpower in the traditional sense, and it certainly isn't some genetic predisposition to success. The difference lies in how they understand and practice discipline. Think about the last time you started something new, maybe a workout routine or a meditation practice. Remember that initial burst of enthusiasm. You probably felt unstoppable for the first few days, maybe even weeks. But then what happened? Life got busy, motivation waned, and slowly but surely, you found yourself back to old patterns. This is where most people assume they've failed, that they lack the internal strength to change. But Peck suggests something revolutionary. The problem isn't that you lack discipline. It's that you've been thinking about discipline all wrong. True discipline, according to Peck, is actually a form of self-love. Now, that might sound contradictory at first. How can denying yourself immediate pleasures be an act of love? Here's where his insight becomes brilliant. When you choose to exercise instead of watching television, when you save money instead of making an impulse purchase, when you have a difficult conversation instead of avoiding conflict, you're not punishing yourself. You're actually giving yourself a gift. You're choosing your future self over your present desires. Let me share one of Peck's most compelling examples. He describes a patient who came to him struggling with chronic lateness. This wasn't just about showing up 5 minutes late to dinner plans. This person was consistently late for work, important appointments, even their own therapy sessions. Through their work together, they discovered something fascinating. The lateness wasn't about poor time management or disrespect for others. It was actually a form of rebellion against discipline itself, a way of maintaining the illusion of freedom while actually becoming enslaved to chaos. The breakthrough came when this patient began to understand that punctuality wasn't about rigid control or pleasing others. It was about creating space for genuine spontaneity. When you're always rushing, always behind schedule, always dealing with the consequences of poor planning, where's the room for real freedom? True liberation came through embracing the discipline of time management, which then opened up possibilities for authentic choice and genuine presence in relationships. This story illustrates something crucial about how discipline works in our modern world. We live in a culture that often frames discipline and freedom as opposites. Social media tells us to follow our bliss and live in the moment. We're bombarded with messages suggesting that any form of constraint is limiting our potential. But Peck reveals the paradox. Without discipline, we become slaves to our impulses, our fears, and our circumstances. Real freedom emerges through conscious choice and commitment. Consider how this plays out in our relationship with technology today. How many times have you picked up your phone intending to quickly check something, only to find yourself scrolling mindlessly 30 minutes later? That's not freedom, that's compulsion. Discipline in this context might mean creating boundaries around device usage, not because technology is evil, but because conscious engagement with it serves you better than unconscious consumption. Peck identifies 4 essential tools of discipline, and understanding these can transform how you approach any area of growth. The first is delaying gratification. This isn't about becoming a monk who never enjoys life's pleasures. It's about developing the ability to choose when and how you experience pleasure, rather than being driven by every immediate desire. Think of it like becoming the conductor of your own orchestra, instead of being tossed around by whatever instrument happens to be loudest at the moment. The second tool involves accepting responsibility for your own life. This might be the most challenging aspect of discipline, because it requires giving up one of our favorite pastimes, blaming our circumstances, our past, other people, or bad luck for our current situation. Peck isn't suggesting that external factors don't matter or that everyone starts from the same place. Rather, he's pointing out that regardless of your starting point, you always have some degree of choice about how you respond to your circumstances. Here's where this becomes deeply practical in our daily lives. Instead of saying, "I don't have time to exercise," discipline helps us recognize the more accurate statement, "I haven't prioritized exercise over other activities." This shift from victim to agent is incredibly empowering. Suddenly, you're not at the mercy of a time shortage. You're making conscious choices about how to allocate your most precious resource. The third tool of discipline is dedication to truth. This means being rigorously honest with yourself about what's really happening in your life, what's working, what isn't, and why. It means being willing to examine your own role in recurring problems instead of always looking for external explanations. In our age of echo chambers and confirmation bias, this kind of intellectual honesty has become almost revolutionary. The fourth and final tool is balancing. Life constantly presents us with competing demands and seemingly contradictory needs. Discipline helps us navigate these tensions without falling into the trap of thinking everything has to be either or. You can be both ambitious and content, both independent and connected, both spontaneous and reliable. The key is developing the wisdom to know when each quality serves you and others best. What makes Peck's approach so compelling is that he doesn't present discipline as a destination, but as a way of traveling. It's not about reaching some state of perfect self-control where you never struggle with temptation or never make mistakes. Instead, it's about developing a relationship with yourself that's based on love, respect, and long-term thinking rather than fear, shame, or immediate gratification. As we prepare to explore how this foundation of discipline supports everything else in our journey of personal growth, remember that every master was once a beginner. Every person you admire for their apparent effortless success has walked this same path of choosing their future self over their present impulses, one small decision at a time. The beautiful truth is that discipline, like any skill, improves with practice, and the rewards compound in ways that will surprise and delight you. Picture this scene for a moment. A 4-year-old sits at a small table, staring at a single marshmallow placed temptingly before them. The researcher has just explained the deal. You can eat this marshmallow right now, or if you wait until I come back in 15 minutes, you'll get 2 marshmallows. What would you do? More importantly, what does this choice reveal about the very foundation of a meaningful life? This famous Stanford marshmallow experiment, conducted decades after Scott Peck wrote The Road Less Traveled, perfectly illustrates what he considered one of the most crucial skills for psychological and spiritual development, the ability to delay gratification. Now, you might be thinking, wait, we're talking about marshmallows and 4-year-olds, but I'm an adult dealing with real problems. But here's the thing that Peck understood so deeply, it seems almost prophetic today. The capacity to postpone immediate pleasure for long-term benefit isn't just a nice-to-have character trait. It's literally the difference between a life of constant struggle and a life of genuine fulfillment. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times this week have you chosen the easy path over the right path? How often have you reached for your phone instead of having that difficult conversation, ordered takeout instead of cooking that healthy meal, watched another episode instead of working on that project that really matters to you? Don't worry, we've all been there. But Peck argues that these seemingly small choices are actually the building blocks of our entire existence. Delaying gratification, according to Peck, is fundamentally about reordering our relationship with time and discomfort. Most of us, he observes, have it completely backwards. We try to get the pain out of the way first, to clear our plates of unpleasantness so we can enjoy the good stuff later. But here's the counterintuitive insight that changes everything. When we consistently choose pleasure first and responsibility second, we actually create more pain in our lives, not less. Peck tells the story of a patient who would always eat dessert before dinner. This wasn't just about food, of course. This person approached everything in life the same way, seeking immediate satisfaction and leaving the hard work for later. The result? A life constantly shadowed by undone tasks, missed opportunities, and the growing weight of postponed responsibilities. The dessert, Peck noted, never tasted quite as sweet when eaten with the knowledge that important work remained undone. Now, contrast this with what Peck calls the mature approach to gratification. Picture someone who tackles their most challenging task first thing in the morning, who has that difficult conversation before it festers into resentment, who saves money before spending it on wants. This person has learned what Peck considers a fundamental life skill, the ability to experience present discomfort for future benefit. They've discovered that, when you eat your vegetables first, the dessert actually tastes better because it's truly earned. But let's dig deeper into why this matters so much more than simple self-control. Peck argues that delaying gratification is actually about developing what he calls foresight. It's the capacity to see beyond the immediate moment and understand the long-term consequences of our choices. In our instant-everything culture, this skill has become both more crucial and more difficult to develop than ever before. Consider how technology has rewired our expectations. We can order food and have it delivered in 30 minutes. We can stream any movie ever made with a single click. We can get answers to almost any question in seconds. These conveniences aren't inherently bad, but they've created what Peck might call a gratification inflation, where even small delays feel unbearable. The muscle of patience has atrophied from lack of use. Yet the most meaningful aspects of human existence still require what they always have: time, patience, and the willingness to endure discomfort for growth. You can't download a deep relationship, stream personal wisdom, or order spiritual maturity with same-day delivery. These treasures still require what Peck calls the willingness to experience pain for the sake of growth. Think about this in terms of modern relationships. How many connections remain superficial because we're unwilling to endure the awkwardness of vulnerability? How many potential friendships never develop because we won't invest the time to move past small talk? Dating apps promise instant connection, but lasting love still requires the patience to truly know another person, to work through conflicts, to choose commitment even when feelings fluctuate. Peck shares a particularly powerful example about a patient who struggled with alcoholism. This person had to learn that recovery meant choosing discomfort every single day. Not just the discomfort of not drinking, but the deeper discomfort of facing the emotions and situations that alcohol had been masking. The immediate gratification of drinking provided temporary relief, but guaranteed long-term suffering. Sobriety required the opposite, accepting short-term discomfort for long-term freedom. This principle extends into every area of life. Physical health requires choosing the discomfort of exercise over the comfort of the couch. Financial security means spending less than you earn, even when you want that shiny new purchase. Career advancement often means taking on challenging projects that stretch your abilities beyond your comfort zone. Meaningful work usually involves periods of frustration and confusion before breakthrough moments of clarity. But here's what makes Peck's approach so practical and hopeful. He's not advocating for a life of constant deprivation or grim determination. Instead, he's pointing out that when we develop the skill of delayed gratification, we actually end up with more pleasure, not less. The person who exercises regularly enjoys physical activities more. The person who saves money experiences less financial stress and more freedom. The person who invests in deep relationships enjoys richer connections. Peck also recognizes that learning to delay gratification is itself a skill that must be developed gradually. He doesn't expect anyone to transform overnight from immediate gratification to perfect self-discipline. Instead, he suggests starting small and building what we might now call delayed gratification muscle memory. Maybe it's waiting 5 minutes before checking your phone when you feel the urge. Maybe it's doing 10 minutes of that project you've been avoiding before allowing yourself to watch TV. Small choices, consistently made, create the foundation for larger transformations. The beauty of this approach is that it creates what Peck calls a positive feedback loop. Each time we successfully delay gratification, we prove to ourselves that we can handle discomfort, that we can make choices based on wisdom rather than impulse. This builds confidence and makes the next choice slightly easier. Over time, what once felt like deprivation begins to feel like strength. As we move forward in exploring Peck's insights about discipline and personal growth, remember that delaying gratification isn't about becoming rigid or joyless. It's about becoming free. Free from the tyranny of immediate impulses, free to make choices aligned with your deepest values, free to build the life you actually want rather than simply reacting to whatever feels good in the moment. This freedom, Peck suggests, is the foundation upon which all other psychological and spiritual growth depends. Picture this. You're sitting across from a friend who's complaining about their job, their relationship, their family, their finances. Sound familiar? We've all been there, either as the complainer or the listener. But here's what Scott Peck noticed in his psychiatric practice that might surprise you. The people who came to see him fell into two distinct categories. Some would walk into his office and immediately start listing everything and everyone that was wrong in their lives. Others would sit down and ask, "What am I doing wrong? How can I change?" Can you guess which group made faster progress? This brings us to one of the most transformative concepts in The Road Less Traveled, the acceptance of responsibility. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this sounds like another lecture about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, stay with me. Peck isn't talking about blame or guilt. He's talking about something far more powerful and liberating than that. Think about the last time something went wrong in your life. Maybe you didn't get that promotion you wanted. Your first instinct might have been to think about how unfair your boss is, how office politics work against you, or how the system is rigged. And you know what? Some of that might even be true. But here's the question Peck would ask. What does focusing on those external factors actually accomplish? Does it change your situation? Does it give you any power to improve things? Peck tells the story of a woman who came to see him, convinced that her marriage was falling apart because her husband was selfish and inconsiderate. Session after session, she would detail his faults with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. She wasn't wrong about many of his shortcomings, but Peck noticed something interesting. Every conversation focused on what her husband needed to change, never on what she might do differently. It was as if she believed that happiness was something that happened to her, not something she had any role in creating. Now think about this for a moment. How often do we fall into this same trap? We wait for our circumstances to change, for other people to behave differently, for the world to become more fair. But what if I told you that this waiting game is actually one of the most disempowering things you can do? What if the very act of taking responsibility, not blame, but responsibility, could transform your life in ways you never imagined? Here's where Peck's insight becomes revolutionary. He argues that accepting responsibility isn't about beating yourself up or pretending that external factors don't matter. It's about recognizing where your power actually lies. When you take responsibility for your response to life's challenges, you suddenly have options you didn't see before. You're no longer a victim of circumstances. You become an active participant in shaping your own experience. Let me paint you a picture that might hit closer to home. Imagine you're stuck in traffic on your way to an important meeting. You have two choices. You can spend the entire time fuming about the construction, cursing other drivers, and arriving at your destination stressed and angry. Or you can accept that this is your reality right now and ask yourself, what can I do with this situation? Maybe you use the time to practice your presentation, call someone you've been meaning to reach, or simply practice patience. Same traffic jam, completely different experience. This is what Peck means by the acceptance of responsibility. It's not about controlling everything that happens to you. That's impossible and exhausting. It's about taking full ownership of how you respond to what happens to you. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more responsibility you accept for your inner world, the more influence you actually have over your outer world. But let's be honest, this isn't always easy. Our culture has become increasingly comfortable with what Peck calls the victim mentality. We live in an age where it's common to hear people say things like, "That's just how I am," or "I can't help it, that's how I was raised," or "if only my circumstances were different." Social media has amplified this tendency, creating echo chambers where we can find endless validation for our grievances and excuses. Peck encountered this resistance constantly in his practice. He'd have patients who would rather remain miserable than accept that they had the power to change their situation. Why? Because accepting responsibility can feel scary. It means acknowledging that if you have the power to improve your life, you also bear some responsibility for how it is right now. It means giving up the comfortable position of being a victim and stepping into the more challenging role of being the author of your own story. Consider the difference between these two statements. My childhood made me this way versus my childhood influenced me, and now I choose how to respond to that influence. Both acknowledge the impact of past experiences, but only one opens the door to change. The first statement is a period at the end of a sentence. The second is a comma, followed by new possibilities. This shift in thinking can transform relationships in profound ways. Instead of waiting for your partner to become more affectionate, you might ask yourself what you can do to create more intimacy in your relationship. Instead of complaining that your friends never call, you might take responsibility for being the kind of friend who reaches out first. Instead of feeling powerless in your career, you might focus on the skills you can develop and the value you can provide. Peck observed that people who embrace responsibility tend to be more resilient, more creative in solving problems, and paradoxically, more compassionate toward others. When you stop expecting the world to cater to your needs, you become more understanding of others' limitations. When you take charge of your own happiness, you're less likely to blame others for your misery. Now, here's something crucial that Peck emphasizes. Accepting responsibility doesn't mean accepting blame for everything bad that happens. If someone treats you poorly, that's their responsibility. But how you respond to that treatment, that's yours. This distinction is vital because it prevents responsibility from becoming a burden of guilt and transforms it into a tool of empowerment. As we move forward in exploring Peck's wisdom about personal growth, remember this fundamental truth. The moment you truly accept responsibility for your life is the moment you begin to live it fully. It's the difference between being a passenger in your own existence and taking hold of the steering wheel. The road less traveled isn't just about making different choices. It's about recognizing that you always have choices to make. Picture this. You're sitting across from a friend who's just discovered something profound about life, and they're leaning forward with that spark in their eyes, ready to share what could change everything. That's exactly what M. Scott Peck does when he talks about dedication to truth, and honestly, it's one of those concepts that sounds simple until you really start living it. Now think about this for a moment. How many times today have you told yourself a little white lie? Maybe you said you were fine when someone asked, even though you're actually stressed about work. Perhaps you convinced yourself that checking social media for the 15th time was research rather than procrastination. We're all guilty of these tiny deceptions, but Peck argues that our relationship with truth goes much deeper than these surface-level fibs. It's about whether we're willing to see reality as it actually is, not as we wish it were. Peck tells us that dedication to truth is like being a scientist of your own life. Scientists don't get to cherry-pick which data they like and ignore the rest. They have to look at all the evidence, even when it contradicts their favorite theories. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike scientists studying external phenomena, we're studying ourselves, which makes the whole process infinitely more challenging and, frankly, more uncomfortable. Let me paint you a picture that Peck might appreciate. Imagine you're looking in a mirror that shows not just your physical appearance, but your true character. Most of us would instinctively want to adjust the lighting, find a more flattering angle, or maybe just avoid the mirror altogether. That's exactly what we do with truth about ourselves and our circumstances. We dim the lights on our flaws, find flattering angles for our mistakes, and sometimes we just refuse to look at all. But here's what Peck discovered in his years of psychiatric practice. The people who were willing to look directly into that unflattering mirror were the ones who actually grew and healed. The patients who insisted on blaming everyone else, who created elaborate justifications for their behavior, who refused to acknowledge their role in their own suffering, these were the people who stayed stuck. Now you might be thinking, okay, but how does this actually work in real life? Let's say you're in a relationship that's been rocky for months. The dedication to truth approach means asking yourself some brutally honest questions. Are you contributing to the problems? Are you expecting your partner to change while remaining rigid yourself? Are you staying in this relationship out of love or out of fear of being alone? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're the ones that lead to real solutions rather than just temporary band-aids. Peck shares stories from his practice that illustrate just how powerful this commitment to truth can be. He talks about patients who spent years in therapy making little progress, until they finally stopped trying to manage their image and started dealing with reality. One patient, for instance, had convinced himself that his drinking wasn't a problem because he only drank wine, not hard liquor, and never before 5 p.m. The breakthrough came when he finally admitted that these arbitrary rules were just elaborate ways of avoiding the truth. He was using alcohol to numb emotional pain. What's fascinating is how this dedication to truth extends beyond personal psychology into every area of life. Think about how we consume news and information today. We've created these perfect little echo chambers where we only hear opinions that confirm what we already believe. Social media algorithms feed us exactly what we want to hear, creating a kind of intellectual comfort food that feels good, but doesn't nourish real understanding. Peck would argue that true mental and spiritual growth requires us to seek out information that challenges our assumptions, even when it's uncomfortable. But here's where Peck's wisdom really shines. He doesn't just tell us to face hard truths and leave it at that. He recognizes that truth-seeking is actually an act of love, both toward ourselves and others. When we're honest about our limitations, we become more compassionate toward the limitations of others. When we acknowledge our own capacity for selfishness or cruelty, we're less likely to demonize those qualities in other people. Consider how this plays out in parenting. A parent dedicated to truth might have to acknowledge that their child is struggling not because of bad teachers or unfair circumstances, but because of genuine learning difficulties that need attention. This truth might be painful to accept, but it's also the key to getting the child the help they actually need. The alternative, protecting ourselves from this difficult truth, ultimately hurts the child we're trying to protect. Peck also explores how dedication to truth affects our relationship with mortality and suffering. In our culture, we've become incredibly skilled at avoiding thoughts of death, aging, and loss. We use euphemisms, we focus obsessively on youth and health, we create elaborate fantasies about control and permanence. But Peck suggests that facing these realities directly, while initially frightening, actually leads to a richer, more meaningful life. When we accept that our time is limited, we make better choices about how to spend it. The really profound insight that Peck offers is that truth-telling becomes easier with practice, like building a muscle. The first time you admit a significant mistake or acknowledge a character flaw, it feels earth-shattering. But each subsequent act of honesty builds confidence and resilience. You start to realize that the truth, even when it's unflattering or uncomfortable, won't actually destroy you. In fact, it often sets you free from the exhausting work of maintaining false narratives. This connects beautifully to what Peck says about genuine self-esteem. He argues that real confidence doesn't come from convincing ourselves we're perfect, but from knowing we can handle whatever truths life reveals about us. It's the difference between brittle confidence that shatters at the first sign of criticism and flexible strength that can bend without breaking. As we wrap up this exploration of dedication to truth, it's worth remembering that Peck isn't advocating for brutal honesty without compassion or truth-telling as a weapon to hurt others. He's talking about the gentle, persistent courage to see clearly and respond wisely. It's about becoming the kind of person who can be trusted with difficult truths because you've learned to trust yourself with them first. The beautiful paradox that Peck illuminates is this. When we stop trying so hard to protect ourselves from reality, we discover that reality, even with all its challenges and imperfections, is actually far more interesting and workable than the fantasies we've been defending. And that discovery opens up possibilities for growth and connection that we never could have imagined from inside our comfortable delusions. You know, there's something almost magical about watching a tightrope walker perform. They make it look so effortless, don't they? One foot carefully placed after another, arms extended, finding that perfect center point where they neither fall to the left nor tumble to the right. But what we're witnessing isn't just physical skill. It's a masterclass in one of life's most essential arts, the discipline of balancing. And this brings us to one of M. Scott Peck's most profound insights in The Road Less Traveled. That life itself is essentially a continuous balancing act, and our mental health, our relationships, and our very growth as human beings depend on how well we master this delicate dance. Now think about this for a moment. When Peck talks about balancing, he's not referring to some New Age concept of work-life balance that we hear thrown around in corporate seminars. He's talking about something much deeper, much more fundamental. He's describing the ongoing tension we all face between competing truths, competing needs, competing values. It's the art of holding two seemingly contradictory ideas in our minds simultaneously without losing our sanity or our direction. Picture yourself trying to raise a child. On one hand, you want to protect them, to shield them from every possible harm and disappointment. That's love, isn't it? But on the other hand, you know that if you protect them too much, you'll rob them of the very experiences they need to grow strong and capable. So there you are, constantly adjusting, constantly recalibrating. Do I step in here, or do I let them figure it out? Do I offer comfort, or do I offer challenge? This is balancing in action, and it never stops. Every parent knows this exhausting, beautiful dance. Peck argues that this kind of balancing isn't just something we do occasionally when faced with big decisions. It's actually the fundamental discipline that separates mental health from mental illness, maturity from immaturity, wisdom from foolishness. Think about the people you know who seem to navigate life with grace and effectiveness. What sets them apart isn't that they avoid difficult choices or complex situations. Rather, they've developed the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to see the validity in different viewpoints, and to find that sweet spot where apparent contradictions can coexist. Consider the balance between dependency and independence. We live in a culture that celebrates independence, self-reliance, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And there's wisdom in that, certainly. But taken too far, this fierce independence becomes isolation, becomes an inability to receive help or love from others. On the flip side, we all know people who have swung too far toward dependency, who can't make a decision without consulting everyone they know, who have never learned to trust their own judgment. The healthy person, the balanced person, has learned to be both independent and dependent as the situation requires. They can stand on their own 2 feet, but they're also comfortable leaning on others when that's what's needed. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Peck points out that this balancing act isn't a one-time achievement, like learning to ride a bicycle. It's an ongoing process that requires constant attention and adjustment. Just like that tightrope walker, we're never really balanced in any permanent sense. We're always balancing, always making tiny corrections, always responding to the shifting winds and changing circumstances of our lives. Think about your own relationships for a moment. Have you ever noticed how the healthiest couples seem to have mastered this art of balancing? They've learned to be both individuals and partners simultaneously. They maintain their own interests, their own friendships, their own dreams, while also creating something beautiful together. They know when to compromise and when to stand firm, when to speak up and when to listen, when to give space and when to draw closer. It's not that they never struggle with these decisions. It's that they've accepted the struggle as part of the dance. But here's what makes balancing so challenging and why so many of us resist it. Balancing requires us to give up the comfort of black and white thinking. It demands that we live in the gray areas, in the spaces between certainties. And let's be honest, that's uncomfortable. It's so much easier to pick a side and stick with it, to see the world in terms of good and evil, right and wrong, us and them. Balancing asks us to embrace paradox, to accept that two things that seem mutually exclusive might both be true. Take the balance between accepting ourselves as we are and striving to become better. Our culture sends us mixed messages about this constantly. On one hand, we're told to practice self-acceptance, to love ourselves unconditionally, to embrace our flaws. On the other hand, we're bombarded with messages about self-improvement, about reaching our potential, about never settling for less than our best. Both messages contain truth, but they seem to contradict each other. The art of balancing allows us to hold both truths simultaneously, to accept ourselves completely while also working toward growth and change. Peck illustrates this beautifully with the concept of what he calls flexible response. He tells us about people who have learned to respond to situations not with rigid patterns or automatic reactions, but with a kind of fluid adaptability. They've developed what we might call emotional agility. When faced with a challenge, they don't immediately resort to their default mode, whether that's fighting, fleeing, people-pleasing, or shutting down. Instead, they pause, they assess, they consider multiple options, and they choose their response based on what the situation actually calls for, not what their habitual patterns dictate. Imagine applying this to your daily life. That difficult conversation with your boss, that disagreement with your spouse, that moment when your teenager is testing every boundary you've ever set. Instead of reacting from old patterns, you could respond from this place of balance. You could be both firm and flexible, both honest and kind, both protective of yourself and open to growth. It's not about being perfect, it's about being conscious, about making choices rather than simply reacting. As we wrap up our exploration of balancing, here's what strikes me most profoundly about Peck's insight. He's showing us that the goal isn't to achieve some perfect state of equilibrium and then maintain it forever. The goal is to develop the skills, the awareness, and the courage to keep balancing, keep adjusting, keep dancing with the complexities of being human. And perhaps most importantly, he's reminding us that this ongoing balancing act isn't a burden to be endured. It's actually the very essence of what it means to live a rich, full, conscious life. So the next time you find yourself caught between competing truths or difficult choices, remember that you're not doing something wrong. You're doing something beautifully, essentially human. You're learning to balance. Picture this. You're sitting across from someone you care deeply about, maybe your partner, your child, or your best friend, and they're going through a really tough time. They're making decisions that seem self-destructive, or they're stuck in patterns that are clearly hurting them. In that moment, what does love actually look like? Is it telling them what they want to hear to make them feel better? Is it that warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you think about them? Or is it something much more challenging, much more demanding than we typically imagine? This is exactly where Scott Peck takes us in one of the most revolutionary sections of The Road Less Traveled. And honestly, it's going to challenge everything you think you know about love. Because here's what Peck discovered through decades of working as a psychiatrist, watching relationships unfold and break apart, seeing people struggle with the deepest questions of connection and care. He realized that most of us have love completely backwards. We think love is a feeling. We think it's that butterflies in your stomach sensation, that rush of emotion when someone walks into the room, that sense of completion we get when we're with the right person. And sure, those feelings are wonderful, they're part of human experience, but Peck argues they're not love itself. They're just the appetizer, not the main course. Real love, authentic love, is something entirely different. It's an act of will. Now think about this for a moment. What does it mean to say love is an act of will rather than a feeling? It means love is a choice you make, a decision you commit to, regardless of how you happen to be feeling on any given Tuesday morning. It's the difference between saying, "I love you because you make me happy," and saying, "I love you, period, and I'm going to act in your best interests even when it's difficult, even when I don't feel like it, even when you're being impossible." Peck tells the story of working with couples in therapy who would come to him saying their love had died. They'd sit in his office, often not even looking at each other, explaining how the feelings were gone, how the magic had disappeared, how they just didn't love each other anymore. And Peck would ask them a simple but profound question. When did you stop acting lovingly toward each other? Almost invariably, they would realize that the actions of love had stopped long before the feelings disappeared. They had stopped choosing to be loving, and then they wondered why love seemed to have left the building. This is where it gets really interesting and really practical for those of us living in the modern world. Think about your smartphone for a second. You probably check it dozens, maybe hundreds of times a day. You don't check it because you feel an overwhelming emotional connection to the device itself. You check it because you've developed a habit, a pattern of behavior that serves a purpose. Now imagine if you approached love the same way, but obviously with much deeper intention and care. What if love became a practice, a set of behaviors you committed to, rather than an emotion you waited to feel? Peck breaks this down even further by distinguishing between what he calls falling in love and actually loving someone. Falling in love, he argues, is easy. It's passive. It happens to you. One day you're minding your own business and then boom, You meet someone and suddenly your brain is flooded with chemicals that make you feel like you're walking on air. You can't eat, you can't sleep. You think about this person constantly. It's intoxicating and it's also temporary. But here's the kicker. Falling in love is actually a trick your biology plays on you. It's nature's way of getting you attached to someone long enough to potentially create offspring and form a bond that will help ensure survival. It's brilliant, really, but it's not sustainable. Those intense feelings of romantic love typically last somewhere between 6 months and 2 years. After that, if you want the relationship to continue and deepen, you have to choose love as an action. This is where Peck's definition becomes almost revolutionary. He defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Read that again slowly. Love is the will to extend yourself, to stretch beyond your comfort zone, to invest your time, energy, and attention in helping someone grow into their fullest potential, even when it's inconvenient, even when it requires sacrifice from you. Now, this doesn't mean becoming a doormat or losing yourself in someone else's needs. Peck is very clear about this. Notice he says, one's own or another's spiritual growth. Real love includes self-love, the commitment to your own development and well-being. You can't truly love someone else if you're not willing to do the hard work of loving yourself, of taking responsibility for your own growth and healing. Let me give you a modern example that might hit home. Imagine your teenage daughter wants to drop out of high school because she's convinced she's going to become a famous influencer. The feeling-based response might be to either get angry and shut her down, or to support her dream because you want her to be happy and you don't want conflict. But the love-as-will response would be to have difficult conversations with her about the realities of social media careers, to help her understand the value of education as a foundation, to set boundaries that might make her temporarily unhappy but serve her long-term growth. It's not the easy path, but it's the loving one. Or think about a friend who's struggling with addiction. The feeling might be to enable them because you hate seeing them in pain, or to cut them off because dealing with their problems is exhausting. But love as an act of will might mean staging an intervention, setting firm boundaries, refusing to give them money while still offering emotional support, staying committed to their highest good even when they hate you for it. This is why Peck says that love is work. It requires discipline, patience, and what he calls spiritual courage. It means being willing to have difficult conversations, to sit with discomfort, to choose someone's growth over their temporary happiness, including your own. It means loving someone enough to risk the relationship itself when their behavior is destructive. But here's what's beautiful about this understanding of love. It's actually liberating. When you realize that love is a choice rather than a feeling, you discover that you have so much more power in your relationships than you thought. You don't have to wait for the right emotions to show up. You don't have to be at the mercy of your moods or your partner's moods. You can choose to act lovingly right now, today, in this moment, regardless of how anyone is feeling. This understanding of love as will rather than emotion sets the foundation for everything else Peck teaches about relationships, parenting, friendship, and even our relationship with ourselves. Because once you grasp that real love is about commitment to growth rather than comfort, about truth rather than convenience, about long-term flourishing rather than short-term happiness, everything changes. You start to see that the deepest form of love is also the most challenging, and paradoxically, the most rewarding path you can choose. You know, there's something profoundly unsettling about the moment when you realize you've been living someone else's life. Maybe it hits you at 35 when you're sitting in a career that feels like wearing someone else's clothes. Or perhaps it comes at 50 when you look around and wonder whose dreams you've been chasing all these years. This is where Scott Peck takes us deeper into one of the most challenging territories of human growth, the risk of independence and what it truly means to live authentically. Picture this scene with me for a moment. A young woman sits across from Peck in his therapy office, tears streaming down her face. She's just realized that her entire life has been an elaborate performance designed to win her parents' approval. Her career choice, her marriage, even her hobbies, all carefully curated to maintain the image of the good daughter. Sound familiar? Peck uses stories like this throughout his work to illuminate a truth that most of us would rather avoid. Genuine independence isn't just scary, it's absolutely terrifying. Now think about this. When we talk about independence, what immediately comes to mind? Financial freedom, living alone, making your own decisions. Peck suggests we're missing something much deeper here. True independence, he argues, isn't about rejecting all external influence or becoming some sort of isolated island of self-sufficiency. Instead, it's about developing the courage to be authentically yourself, even when that authenticity disappoints others, challenges expectations, or leads you down paths that others can't understand. The risk in this kind of independence is real and immediate. When you choose authenticity over approval, you're essentially placing a bet on yourself that might not pay off in the ways society typically measures success. You might lose friends who only knew the version of you that you thought they wanted to see. You might disappoint family members who had their own dreams wrapped up in your life choices. You might even discover that some of your own goals weren't actually yours at all, but internalized expectations from a culture that profits from your compliance. Peck tells the story of a successful businessman who came to him feeling completely empty despite having achieved everything he thought he wanted. This man had spent decades climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall, as the saying goes. The risk of independence meant he had to be willing to climb down from that ladder, admit he'd been pursuing someone else's definition of success, and start over with the frightening question: what do I actually want from this life? Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Peck observed that most people avoid this risk not because they're lazy or cowardly, but because they've never learned to trust their own inner compass. We live in a world that's constantly telling us who we should be, what we should want, how we should feel. From the moment we're born, we're surrounded by voices: parents, teachers, friends, media, society, all offering their version of what our lives should look like. The risk of independence requires us to turn down the volume on all those external voices long enough to hear our own. But here's the paradox that Peck illuminates so beautifully. The very act of risking independence actually makes us more capable of genuine connection with others. When you're not constantly performing a role or trying to meet someone else's expectations, you become available for real relationships. You can love others for who they truly are instead of who you need them to be to validate your choices. You can receive love that's meant for the real you, not the carefully constructed version you've been presenting to the world. Think about the relationships in your own life for a moment. How many of them are built on authentic connection versus mutual performance? Peck suggests that until we risk independence, we can't really know. We might be surrounded by people who love our mask, our role, our function in their lives, but who have never actually met us. The risk of independence means being willing to find out who stays when the mask comes off. Now, this doesn't mean independence requires us to become selfish or inconsiderate. Peck is careful to distinguish between healthy independence and what he calls rebellious dependence, where we define ourselves primarily in opposition to others rather than from our own authentic center. True independence, he argues, allows us to choose our commitments and relationships freely, which actually makes us more capable of genuine love and service, not less. Consider the modern workplace, where so many of us spend the majority of our waking hours. How many people do you know who are genuinely excited about their work versus those who are simply going through the motions? The risk of independence might mean leaving a secure but soul-crushing job to pursue something that actually aligns with your values and interests. It might mean speaking up about practices that conflict with your ethics, even when it's politically inconvenient. It might mean refusing to participate in the small compromises that, over time, erode your sense of who you really are. Peck also explores how this risk plays out in our closest relationships. He shares the story of a woman who realized she had never actually chosen her marriage. She had simply followed the script that said she should marry her college boyfriend because he was suitable. The risk of independence meant either choosing her marriage consciously, with full awareness of what she was committing to, or acknowledging that the relationship was built on obligation rather than love. Either choice required tremendous courage. What makes this risk so difficult is that independence often feels lonely at first. When you stop trying to be what everyone else wants you to be, you might discover that some relationships were more fragile than you realized. You might find yourself in the uncomfortable position of not fitting neatly into any of the boxes that society provides. But Peck suggests that this temporary loneliness is actually the price of admission to a more authentic life. The beautiful thing about embracing this risk is that it often inspires others to do the same. When someone in your life starts living authentically, it gives others permission to examine their own masks and performances. Authenticity, Peck observed, is contagious in the best possible way. As we move forward in exploring these deeper territories of personal growth, remember that the risk of independence isn't a one-time decision but an ongoing practice. Every day presents us with small choices between authenticity and performance, between our own truth and others' expectations. The courage to choose independently, moment by moment, is what gradually builds a life that feels genuinely our own. And that, Peck would argue, is the foundation for everything else that matters: love, meaning, service, and the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've lived your own life rather than someone else's version of what your life should be. Picture this: you're scrolling through your social media feed, and every other post seems to be about someone finding their soulmate or declaring they've met the one. Movies bombard us with stories of love at first sight, of couples who complete each other so perfectly they never argue, never struggle, never have to work at their relationship. It's everywhere, this intoxicating idea that true love should be effortless, magical, and perpetually blissful. But what if I told you that this very belief, this romantic fairy tale we've all been sold, might actually be destroying our chances at real, lasting love? M. Scott Peck pulls no punches when he tackles what he calls the myth of romantic love. And honestly, it's one of those chapters that might make you squirm a little in your seat, because chances are, you've bought into this myth at some point, and maybe you still are. We all have. It's practically hardwired into our culture, passed down through generations of fairy tales, reinforced by every romantic comedy we've ever watched, and whispered to us in the lyrics of countless love songs. So what exactly is this myth that Peck is so determined to debunk? Well, it's actually several interconnected beliefs that form a kind of romantic house of cards. The first pillar of this myth is the idea that love is effortless. You know the feeling, right? When you first fall for someone, everything seems to click into place. Conversations flow naturally. You finish each other's sentences. You can't imagine ever disagreeing about anything important. This is what we call falling in love. And it feels so good, so natural, that we assume this is what love is supposed to feel like all the time. But here's where Peck drops a truth bomb that might sting a little. That euphoric feeling you experience when you first fall for someone, that's not actually love. It's a biological and psychological phenomenon, sure, and it serves an important purpose in getting relationships started. But calling it love is like calling the spark that starts a fire the same thing as the steady, warming flame that heats your home through a long winter. Think about this for a moment. When you're in that initial stage of infatuation, are you really seeing the other person clearly? Or are you seeing a projection of your own desires, your own needs, your own fantasies about what love should look like? Peck suggests that what we call falling in love is actually a temporary collapse of our ego boundaries, a kind of psychological merging where we lose track of where we end and the other person begins. It feels incredible, but it's not sustainable, and more importantly, it's not real love. The second myth that Peck dismantles is this notion that somewhere out there is your one perfect match, your other half, your soulmate who will complete you. Now, I know this might sound romantic, but think about what this belief actually implies. If you need someone else to complete you, What does that say about your wholeness as a person? And if there's only one perfect person for you out of billions of people on this planet, what are the odds you'll actually find them? It's a setup for disappointment. And worse, it can keep you from appreciating and nurturing the imperfect but potentially beautiful relationships right in front of you. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. Peck tells us about a couple who came to him for counseling. They'd been married for several years, but the husband was convinced he'd married the wrong person. He'd met someone at work, and the connection felt so natural, so effortless, that he was sure this new woman must be his true soulmate. The feelings he had for her were so intense, so reminiscent of that initial rush he'd felt with his wife years ago, that he was ready to blow up his marriage to pursue what he believed was real love. But here's what Peck helped this man understand. Those feelings of effortless connection, that sense of having found the one, were exactly the same psychological phenomenon he'd experienced with his wife when they first met. The only difference was that he'd done the hard work of building a real relationship with his wife, complete with conflicts, compromises, and the inevitable discovery that she was a flawed human being just like him. With this new woman, he was still in the fantasy stage, still projecting his idealized vision of love onto someone he barely knew. This brings us to perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the romantic love myth, the belief that real love means never having to work at your relationship. If you truly love someone, the thinking goes, everything should just flow naturally. Conflict means you're incompatible. Having to consciously choose to love someone day after day means it's not real love. Arguments are signs that you're with the wrong person. But consider this. Every meaningful relationship in your life requires effort, doesn't it? Your friendships, your relationship with your family members, even your relationship with yourself. Why would romantic love be any different? Peck argues that genuine love is not a feeling at all, but a decision, an action, a commitment to care for another person's growth and well-being even when it's difficult, even when you don't feel like it, even when they're not being particularly lovable. Now I can almost hear some of you thinking, but that sounds so unromantic. Where's the passion, the excitement, the magic? And I get it. There's something deeply appealing about the idea that love should sweep us off our feet and carry us away. But here's the thing. Real love, the kind that lasts and deepens over time, is actually far more magical than any temporary infatuation could ever be. Think about the couples you know who have been together for decades and still genuinely enjoy each other's company. Do you think they never fight? Do you think they wake up every morning feeling butterflies? Of course not. What they have is something much more profound. A deep knowledge of each other, a commitment to each other's growth, and the security that comes from choosing each other again and again, through good times and bad. Peck makes a crucial distinction here between cathecting and loving. Cathecting is when we invest our emotional energy in someone because of what they do for us, how they make us feel, what they add to our lives. It's conditional, based on performance, and it can be withdrawn when the other person stops meeting our needs. Loving, on the other hand, is an unconditional commitment to another person's spiritual growth and well-being, regardless of what we get in return. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or staying in an abusive relationship. True love sometimes means setting boundaries, having difficult conversations, or even walking away if the other person consistently chooses destructive behavior. But it does mean approaching relationships from a place of genuine care for the other person's highest good, not just your own emotional needs. So how do we break free from these myths and cultivate real love? It starts with doing the hard work of becoming a whole person yourself, someone who doesn't need another person to complete them, but who chooses to share their completeness with someone else. It means developing the discipline to love someone through their imperfections, and the humility to receive love despite your own flaws. The path to genuine love isn't easy, but it's infinitely more rewarding than chasing the illusion of effortless romance. Because when you build something real together, when you choose each other through the mundane moments and the difficult seasons, When you support each other's growth even when it's uncomfortable, you create something that no fairy tale could ever capture. A love that's both deeply human and genuinely transcendent. Picture yourself sitting across from me with a steaming cup of coffee, and I'm about to share something that might completely shift how you think about both religion and evolution. You know how these two topics usually end up in opposite corners of the ring, throwing punches at each other. Well, M. Scott Peck has something fascinating to say about that, and it's going to make you see both in an entirely new light. Now think about this for a moment. When most people hear the words religion and evolution in the same sentence, they immediately assume we're talking about some kind of cosmic battle between science and faith. But what if I told you that Peck sees them not as enemies, but as dance partners in the most beautiful waltz of human development? What if spirituality and evolution aren't just compatible, but actually depend on each other for our growth as conscious beings? Here's where Peck gets really interesting. He suggests that evolution isn't just about physical adaptation, about growing longer necks like giraffes or developing opposable thumbs. No, evolution has another dimension entirely, one that's been quietly working behind the scenes of human consciousness for millennia. He calls it spiritual evolution, and it's happening right now, in your life, in mine, in every moment we choose growth over stagnation. Think about the last time you faced a really difficult decision, one that forced you to examine your deepest values. Maybe it was choosing between a comfortable job and a risky career change that aligned with your passion. Maybe it was deciding whether to forgive someone who hurt you deeply. In that moment of wrestling with your conscience, of feeling torn between what's easy and what's right, you were participating in spiritual evolution. You were literally evolving as a conscious being. Peck tells us that this kind of evolution requires something that Darwin's finches never needed: the willingness to suffer consciously. Now, before you think I've gone all doom and gloom on you, hear me out. This isn't about seeking pain for its own sake. It's about recognizing that growth, real growth, often requires us to sit with discomfort rather than running from it. It's about choosing the harder path when we know it leads to greater wisdom and compassion. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. Imagine a woman named Sarah who grew up in a household where anger was never expressed directly. Whenever conflict arose, it was swept under the rug with forced smiles and passive-aggressive comments. For 30 years, Sarah followed this pattern, avoiding confrontation at all costs. But then she had children of her own, and she realized that her inability to handle conflict honestly was teaching them the same dysfunctional patterns. The spiritual evolution moment came when Sarah chose to feel the terror of speaking up, of risking disapproval, of potentially damaging relationships in order to model authentic communication for her children. This wasn't just personal growth, Peck would argue. This was evolution in action, consciousness choosing a higher path despite the emotional cost. Sarah was literally evolving beyond her conditioning, and in doing so, she was contributing to the evolution of human consciousness itself. Now, you might be wondering, where does religion fit into all this? Here's where Peck's insight becomes truly revolutionary. He suggests that the world's great religious traditions aren't just ancient superstitions or outdated moral codes. They're actually evolutionary tools, sophisticated technologies for consciousness development that have been tested and refined over thousands of years. Consider the practice of meditation, found in virtually every spiritual tradition. What is meditation, really, but a deliberate training of attention, a conscious choice to observe our thoughts and reactions rather than being swept away by them? From an evolutionary perspective, this represents a quantum leap in human development. We're literally training our brains to step back from automatic responses, to create space between stimulus and reaction. That's not just spiritual practice, that's evolution in real time. Or think about the concept of forgiveness, central to so many religious teachings. Now you might say, come on, forgiveness is just being nice, right? But Peck sees something much deeper here. Forgiveness requires us to override our most primitive impulses for revenge and self-protection. It demands that we access a level of consciousness that can hold paradox, that can simultaneously acknowledge harm while choosing not to perpetuate it. That's evolutionary development that goes far beyond anything we see in the animal kingdom. Here's what really gets interesting, though. Peck argues that we're living through a unique moment in evolutionary history, a time when spiritual evolution is accelerating at an unprecedented pace. Think about it. Never before have so many people had access to the wisdom traditions of multiple cultures. Never before have we been able to compare the insights of Buddhist mindfulness with Christian contemplation, Islamic surrender with Hindu self-inquiry. We're like kids in a cosmic candy store of consciousness-expanding tools. But here's the catch, and this is where Peck's psychiatric training really shows. Having access to all these spiritual technologies doesn't automatically make us more evolved. Just like having a gym membership doesn't automatically make you fit, having spiritual knowledge doesn't automatically make you wise. The evolution happens in the doing, in the daily choice to engage with practices that stretch our capacity for love, awareness, and authentic action. This brings us to one of Peck's most profound insights about the relationship between religion and evolution. He suggests that the next stage of human evolution isn't going to be about developing bigger brains or stronger bodies. It's going to be about developing what he calls conscious competence in love. Not the romantic, feel-good kind of love, but love as a verb, love as the willingness to extend ourselves for the spiritual growth of ourselves and others. Now, think about this in terms of your own life. When was the last time you chose to love someone not because it felt good, but because you recognized that they, like you, are a work in progress, a consciousness struggling to evolve? When did you last extend yourself not for what you might get in return, but simply because extending ourselves for others' growth is what conscious beings do? This is where religion and evolution meet in the most practical way imaginable. Every time we choose patience over irritation with a difficult colleague, every time we listen deeply to someone whose views challenge our own, every time we act from wisdom rather than fear, we're participating in the greatest evolutionary experiment in the history of our species. We're consciously evolving, and in doing so, we're contributing to the evolution of consciousness itself. As we wrap up this exploration of how spirituality and evolution dance together in human development, I want you to consider one final thought. Maybe the question isn't whether you believe in evolution or religion. Maybe the question is whether you're willing to participate consciously in your own evolution, using whatever tools, whether scientific or spiritual, that help you become more capable of authentic love and genuine wisdom. That's the real invitation Peck offers us, and it's one that transforms both religion and evolution from abstract concepts into the most practical, immediate reality of our daily lives. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, and I'm about to share something that might just change how you see the entire universe. We've been talking about discipline, love, and growth, but now Scott Peck takes us into territory that's both mysterious and profoundly personal. He calls it grace, and honestly, it's the kind of topic that makes even the most rational among us pause and wonder. You know how sometimes life throws you these moments that seem almost too perfect to be coincidence? Maybe you were thinking about an old friend, and they called out of the blue. Or perhaps you found exactly the book you needed at precisely the moment you needed it. Peck suggests these aren't just random occurrences, but glimpses of something far more extraordinary at work in our lives. Grace, as Peck describes it, is like having an invisible wind at your back, pushing you toward growth and healing even when you're not aware of it. Think about a time when you were struggling with a difficult decision, feeling completely lost, and somehow the right answer just emerged from nowhere. Or when you were going through your darkest period, and unexpected help appeared from the most unlikely source. That's grace in action, working behind the scenes of your ordinary life. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Peck argues that grace operates on multiple levels, and one of the most fascinating is what he calls the unconscious. Imagine your mind as an iceberg, with consciousness being just that tiny tip visible above water. Below the surface, there's this vast realm of mental activity that we're barely aware of, yet it's constantly working on our behalf. Have you ever gone to bed with a problem that seemed impossible to solve, only to wake up with the answer crystal clear in your mind? That's your unconscious, guided by grace, doing the heavy lifting while you sleep. Peck shares the story of a woman who had been struggling with a complex personal issue for months. She'd analyzed it from every angle, discussed it with friends, even sought professional help, but remained stuck. Then one morning, while absent-mindedly washing dishes, the solution simply popped into her consciousness, fully formed and obviously right. She hadn't been thinking about the problem at all in that moment, yet somehow her unconscious mind had been quietly working on it, assembling pieces of insight until they clicked into place. This kind of experience points to something Peck finds both humbling and awe-inspiring. We're not nearly as in control of our growth and healing as we like to think. Sure, discipline and conscious effort matter enormously, but there's also this mysterious force that seems to want us to evolve, to become more than we currently are. It's as if the universe itself is conspiring to help us grow, even when we're resistant or unaware. Consider how this plays out in modern therapy and healing. Peck, drawing from his psychiatric practice, noticed that patients would often have breakthrough moments that seemed to come from nowhere. Someone would be stuck in the same destructive patterns for years, working hard in therapy but making little progress, and then suddenly something would shift. A new perspective would emerge, or they'd find the courage to make a change they'd never been able to make before. The timing often seemed almost miraculous, as if some deeper intelligence knew exactly when they were ready for the next step. But grace isn't just about individual healing. Peck suggests it operates in relationships too. Think about those moments when you and someone you care about seem to understand each other perfectly, almost telepathically. Or when conflict that seemed hopeless suddenly resolves in a way that brings you closer together. These synchronicities, these perfect timings, these unexpected gifts of understanding all point to something beyond mere chance. Now you might be thinking, this sounds pretty mystical for a book about psychology. And you'd be right. Peck acknowledges that grace pushes us beyond the purely rational into territory that science can't fully explain. But rather than seeing this as a limitation, he sees it as an invitation to embrace mystery as part of the human experience. After all, some of the most important aspects of life, love, beauty, meaning, purpose, resist easy scientific explanation, yet we know they're real because we experience them. Here's something particularly striking about Peck's view of grace. He suggests it's not something we can earn or control. Unlike discipline, which requires our conscious effort, grace seems to operate according to its own mysterious logic. It shows up when it shows up, often when we least expect it and most need it. This can be both comforting and frustrating. Comforting because it means we're not entirely responsible for our own growth and healing. There's help available beyond our own limited resources. Frustrating because we can't simply decide to receive grace the way we might decide to exercise or eat better. Yet Peck doesn't suggest we should just sit back and wait for grace to strike like lightning. Instead, he proposes that while we can't control grace, we can make ourselves more open to it. How? Through the very practices we've been discussing throughout this book: discipline, love, honest self-examination, and the willingness to face difficult truths about ourselves and our world. It's as if grace flows more freely through lives that are actively engaged in the work of growth. Think of it like preparing soil for a garden. You can't make the rain fall or the sun shine, but you can till the ground, remove the weeds, and plant the seeds. Grace is like the rain and sunshine, mysterious, uncontrollable, but absolutely essential for growth. Our job is to prepare the soil of our lives through conscious effort, creating conditions where grace can work its magic. This understanding of grace offers a beautiful balance to the sometimes overwhelming emphasis on self-improvement and personal responsibility in our culture. Yes, your choices matter enormously. Yes, discipline and effort are crucial, but you're also held and supported by forces beyond your understanding, nudged toward growth and healing by an intelligence far greater than your conscious mind. As we prepare to explore how this mysterious grace might be connected to something even larger than individual growth, take a moment to reflect on the unexpected gifts, perfect timings, and mysterious helps that have appeared in your own life. Because once you start noticing grace, you'll find it's been there all along, quietly working behind the scenes of your ordinary, extraordinary existence. M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled delves into the complexities of life's journey, emphasizing the importance of discipline, love, and personal growth as essential components for a fulfilling life. Through a deep examination of psychological and spiritual health, Peck encourages readers to confront life's challenges head-on, offering insights that resonate deeply and personally. Here are some key actionable takeaways. 1. Embrace discipline. Discipline is the foundation of personal growth. Start incredibly small by setting simple, daily routines that challenge you a little each day. Remember, it's not about perfection but progress. Be patient and acknowledge every small achievement. 2. Accept responsibility. Accepting responsibility is crucial for personal development. Begin with acknowledging your role in everyday situations. Reflect on how you can make different choices moving forward. This practice empowers you to be an active participant in your own life narrative. 3. Balance love and independence. Love should enrich, not imprison. Approach your relationships by balancing emotional closeness with your personal needs. Practice honest communication, setting boundaries where necessary to foster healthier and more supportive connections. 4. Challenge your beliefs. Growth often means redefining what we believe. Start by questioning long-held assumptions, whether they concern personal beliefs or societal norms. Engage in open dialogues, read widely, and be open to new perspectives that challenge your current viewpoints. 5. Value delayed gratification. Understand the power of patience and foresight. Practice delaying gratification in small ways, like saving money for a future goal, to build resilience and self-control. This teaches appreciation for long-term rewards over immediate satisfaction. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.